Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Avorion episode 4. I'm Enigmas, and today it's the spirit of a muscle car in space. We're continuing almost where we left off in the last episode. We were starting to work on the side panel and we got a certain amount of work done on it, and then I realized that there was a gap between the side panel and the front quarter panel that I just couldn't live with. It was one of those things where I looked at it and I was trying to envision how that would fit with the overall look of the ship once everything was done, and I just decided that I had to redo that section. In the process of doing that, though, I realized something that I probably could have realized a while ago but didn't, and that's the way that the game handles the placement of blocks within the voxel kind of universe that we've talked about so many different times. Normally, if you've got, for example, a 45-degree slope block, it exists in the space of a cube, so the space taken up by the block is only about half of what you could have in that entire cube, and then the other half is just wasted space. You can't put anything in there because of the nature of the way the game is designed. So I've played games where they usually go under the moniker of microblocks, where someone, either the game developers themselves or a modder, will come up with a way so that you can use some of that wasted space in the blocks, but it's never really all that great, I guess is the only way I can describe it. I've never really been hugely impressed by it. There's some people who just absolutely love it. It's the bee's knees to be able to put something in that 45-degree slope area of nothingness and have it not ruin the game or not have the game say that you can't put it there. In this case, you can take blocks on any angle, any slope, whatever, and put them right up against each other, and the game doesn't care. The game isn't really checking to see if there's wasted space and denying you access to that space. It's just whatever. You got a block there. If so, you probably can't put it. You can't put anything else necessarily through that area, but as long as there's no solid space intersecting, you're fine. In fact, you can actually have a certain amount of overlap, and I was noticing this as I was working through this particular section here. There were some of the blocks that I was placing that I thought I was using just very, very skinny blocks, but it turns out they were about 3 times thicker than I thought they were, and they were actually protruding through the other side of the panel that I was working on, while at the same time being exactly where I wanted them on the front of the panel. The benefit to that, as I was mentioning in a previous episode, is that when it comes time to place the glass, basically we're going to be doing something that very closely resembles the idea of a car's cockpit made out of glass. And when it comes time to place that, I'm not going to have a big flat area upon which to build it. So having the option to kind of sink it into the hull a little bit and have everything fit without having the game, have a hissy is very cool. And it's kind of a load off my mind knowing that I'll be able to do that to at least some extent and likely be able to produce the outcome that I'm looking for without driving myself mad and being ultimately very disappointed. We get that side section mostly done, and I wanted to start working on the top along the side, because the top section in the middle, that's basically where the cockpit is going to be, and then in behind that there's going to be just a flat deck area similar to like the trunk of a car, just in terms of the appearance. I'm not going to try and detail the trunk of a car, but you get the idea. And one of the difficulties that I've been having is that every once in a while, depending on how things go together, you end up with something that's a half a block space too long or too short, and you can't remove it and replace it and have it fixed. It's once you've done whatever it was that created that problem, there's no fixing it unless you basically dismantle a fairly significant portion of the ship trying to find the block that's out of alignment in order to put everything back together, because it's not always visible. And the challenge there is, then what do? Do you go through that process of tearing everything down to start all over and hope that you don't have the same problem repeat? Or do you try and work with that offset and just kind of fill in around it as best you can, sort of stuff blocks in there? The ability to have blocks pass through and into one another when you place them helps in being able to close that gap, but it's not always that simple. It's not always a case of just being able to stuff something in the gap and have it closed and it's done. Quite often it'll interfere with a profile that you're working on. You want a particular curve, and you get the pieces coming together, and then you realize that you've got a gap in between the two that you have to fill in order to finish it, but you can't because it's that half block size. I'm using the smallest resolution that the game will allow me to in terms of the block size and scale and things of that nature. So when we get to that spot where things are just off, it's kind of confusing. The first few times I was looking at it, I was trying to figure out what I could do in order to close the gap, and there was never anything that I could do. And so now I understand it. And one of the solutions, I think, in terms of the long-term approach is better planning and better execution, because it's very, very easy sometimes to just see the shortest possible route to completion using really, really thin blocks, really large blocks, things of that nature. But when we're trying to do detail like this, where things are constantly changing angle, producing curves from angles stacked together, etc., etc., it's not always as straightforward as just stuffing in that little piece and finding the cause of things, because it's so many blocks in. Right now, I can spend a pretty large amount of time just going around on the inside of the hull, digging out all of the blocks that no longer serve a purpose because they were part of something that I placed, an idea that I had, and then I decided to change it, but I didn't remove all of the blocks. So there's a lot to be said, I think, for developing the habit of just being more orderly and more aware of how I'm placing things, and not necessarily looking at something and saying the easiest way to fix that would be whatever. It would probably be the way to fix that's going to cause me the least problems down the line would be something else. So that's what we'll end up doing. And I think that's just a function of time, really, and being aware of it so that I don't start producing bad habits that take forever to break if I break them at all. So you can see we're doing a lot of really small blocks in this section here, because we've got this transition. I want like a curve, but it's a fairly abrupt curve. It goes from the top down to the side, and that means that in order to pull that off, the only way that I've really come up with to do that is just very small blocks, as small as I can get them, in order to make that sort of curve happen. And then ideally, this is where I would make the transition back to larger, more moderately sized blocks. Not the really big long ones, not the little wee tiny ones like I'm working now, the strips. Use them when I have to, and then get back to the sort of moderate sized blocks that give me the flexibility to do all kinds of different things without the headaches that can sometimes accompany realizing that you didn't build things with the future in mind. And one of the ideas that I had for this sort of rear panel or rear quarter panel was to have sort of like a scoop on the side. And I've done this on various different ship designs. It's something that I like to do because I like the look of it, and it's just basically like having a vent, and then it's got some cross members or supports in place that make sort of like slats and segment the opening, and using that just to add a little bit of interest to something that would otherwise be kind of a bland sort of panel. So we've got, there we go, look, see with the big long skinny blocks. I think I'm doing myself a favor by using those, but I'm really not. It's just, I'm almost 100% convinced that it's a bad idea unless you absolutely know that it's the only way to produce a particular profile. Doing it like that, like I just did, narrower, that's probably the key to victory, especially in the long term and larger builds when things get more involved and we've got multiple different things coming together. It's the moderate placement that will probably carry the day. Now, in this case, I haven't really... There was no plan in my head for how exactly I wanted to end this middle section on this side. It was just sort of, it's going to be there, it's going to be flared out, it's not just going to be flat in behind the quarter panel, and then it's going to slowly work its way back in towards the flatter section of the panel, and then we'll have the rear quarter panel flaring out again. I can see potentially making a few adjustments to this, but right now I think the KISS principle is going to be my best friend in order to keep myself sane. Now, one of the concerns that I have, and I don't even know if concern is the best word that I could have chosen, but there's always some people who would love to see every part of the process when we're doing these builds, and some get a little bit tired if we, get a little bit frustrated if we spend too much time in one area, particularly if we have an area like this where we were working on it in the last episode and now we're working on it in this episode. And if I were to tear it apart and make another episode about this central side panel, there would be a mutiny. And I understand that. There's kind of that, I see both sides. There's a part of me that doesn't want to go too heavy into the repetition and the iteration, especially when it's arbitrary. Like, I'm just basically taking something that I wasn't entirely satisfied with and gutting it just to try something different. So there's going to be some changes made where we aren't going to be covering it as part of the builds in the video. And then there will be times when, it will make sense to have a little bit of repetition and a little bit of productive iteration just to show this is what we had, and then this is the alternative that we came up with as a result of something that we learned or an idea that we had, and this is what sort of came of it. That kind of makes sense. So expect to see changes, things maybe not necessarily the same as when we left off from time to time, minor additions, minor modifications, and if there's anything major, even if I don't show it, I'll, make sure and describe what I did and why. This part here is where we're going to start doing that flare out. And we'll have the vent in the front, and it's not going to actually go anywhere. I don't plan on making a complete system where you could probably fly around in your drone and, go in the vent and end up somewhere else. It'll just be a wall. Dead end. We don't even know what we're scooping into the vent. I'm partial to space plankton, but who knows? Could be a little bit hard on the resale value of the ship. I still haven't done any mining aside from what the tutorial had me do. It sends you out to mine one asteroid, and then it has you start building. And I've done the tutorial, I think 3 times now, just because of the timing. I did the tutorial once and then I kind of forgot everything, so I did it again and then I forgot everything, and then I did it one more time. So I've mined 3 asteroids so far, and that's about it. That's about the extent of it. I haven't fired a weapon at anything, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you don't have to be violent. We'll get plenty of violence in the future, but it's something that I had in the back of my mind is I haven't shot at anything. We have 2, I think they're Gatling guns, and 2 mining lasers that were given to us, and that's the beginning that that's the beginning complement of weapons that we're provided with for our first ship. And then, as I understand it, and probably someone who has played the game will clarify one way or the other, you have to build turrets at like a special station or something. I remember reading something about it. You can't just produce turrets out of nowhere and stack them on your ship. I think it's designed so that you have to go somewhere specifically and get your turrets, which makes sense, because if you can imagine the guy with unlimited resources in his PvP mobile flying around, and as his weapons get destroyed, he just creates new ones and sticks them on. Maybe not the best way to balance the whole scenario, but we'll see. There's basically the entire PvE side of the game that I haven't touched at all. Now, the nice thing about this particular section is that it's almost symmetrical top to bottom. Almost. Very important that I make that distinction. It's not taking a long time to put it together because it's actually a fairly simple shape, and the fact that we've got that front section open makes it even more simple. We don't have to worry about how we're going to close that off and make it look good because we've just left it open, which is kind of cool. I'm always partial for those sorts of wins where you don't even realize it when you're doing it. It's just part of the plan, and then you realize that there was a hidden benefit to being a little bit creative. Now we've got this flat section on the side of this thing, and it's I unfortunately I've gone into the habit of equating flat with boring. In a lot of cases, you find a lot of my ship designs in previous games, anywhere there's anything that's flat for any real large amount of space, I fill it up with something, or I put something in there just to break it up. So in this case, I ended up just using some of the triangles, the outside corner blocks, 45-degree outside corner, and make them really, really flat and then really, really large. And you get these really gradual, like very, very soft angles, and everything sort of comes together very, very nicely, and you don't even really notice necessarily at first glance that that's what's happening. It's just a thing that you're looking at. It just doesn't look completely flat anymore. So that's a little trick that I've been working on, and there's always ways, I think, to refine a general strategy like that for changing a profile or a shape that you don't like. In this case, it starts off with using inside and outside corners squished and elongated, but I think over time we'll probably come up with more useful or more interesting ways of doing it as well. Here, all we have left to do basically is close off this back end and then put the slats in the front section. There's only a couple minutes left, so I'm going to let you guys watch that in peace. The next episode, we're going to basically be working in the back section of the ship, and probably, depending on time and how things go together, start working on the glass portion and that central area on top and see where we get for that. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes in this and other series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.